We're going to have a busy afternoon. We have a lot on our agenda. We have a lot of future business, and we have some wonderful guests here today doing submissions, and we're continuing on with our study on the bilateral and trilateral trade with North America between Canada, the United States, and Mexico. Looks like we have all the MPs here. But we have some witnesses here from Fertilizer Canada. No, we have this first is Rogers Communication, BCE, and Alberta Barley. Welcome, folks. And if it's your first time here, we appreciate it if you keep it around 5 minutes or shorter. But and then don't worry, there'll be lots of room for dialogue later on in questions and answers. So without further ado, I think we'll get started, and we'll start off with Rogers Communication. And is it Pamela Dinsmore?
Correct. Yeah.
Go ahead, you got the floor.
Okay. Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Pam Dinsmore, and I'm the Vice President of Regulatory Cable for Rogers Communications. Thank you for the invitation to outline Rogers' views regarding the ongoing North American Free Trade Agreement renegotiations. Rogers is one of the largest Canadian telecommunications and media companies. We provide internet and telecommunications services on both a wireline and wireless basis. We are also creators and distributors of content. We operate 2 over-the-air local television stations, City and Omni, a number of specialty channels including Sportsnet and FX, 55 radio stations, a suite of digital publishing brands including Maclean's and Chatelaine, and cable systems in Ontario and Atlantic Canada. We employ over 25,000 Canadians. We have a broad perspective and a profound interest in the outcome of these trade negotiations. In my remarks today, I will address 3 key areas: copyright, telecommunications, and the cultural exception. I will start with copyright. A number of issues emerged out of the United States Trade Representatives process, with recommendations that Canada be required to make changes to its copyright legislation through the NAFTA renegotiation. We are concerned that the scope of the renegotiations could be broadened to include copyright issues that were not addressed in the existing agreement. These issues include replacing the Made in Canada notice infringement complaint system with a notice and takedown regime, providing U.S. over-the-air broadcasters with exclusive retransmission rights over their freely available signals, repealing or amending the Copyright Modernization Act's personal use and intermediary exceptions, and/or taking away the protections granted to Internet intermediaries such as ISPs and search engines. The 2012 Copyright Modernization Act was carefully developed by Parliament over many years and is designed to serve the interests of all Canadians in its balance between rights holders and users of copyrighted works. We are concerned that a trade renegotiation where copyright issues are used as bargaining chips could endanger this delicate balance. In our view, any changes to our domestic copyright laws should be made through the upcoming 5-year review of the Copyright Modernization Act, not through the NAFTA renegotiation. In the area of telecommunications, I would like to comment on 2 of the USTR's objectives for the telecommunications sector set out on July 17th. The first is the objective to promote a competitive supply of telecommunications services by facilitating market entry through transparent regulation and an independent regulator. Canada has an independent regulatory agency, the CRTC, which is transparent in both its rules and its decision-making processes. In fact, its processes and procedures are very similar in nature to those exercised by the Federal Communications Commission in the U.S. Also, the current Canadian foreign ownership rules already permit market entry by foreign firms into the telecommunications sector. Canada's Telecommunications Act exempts companies with less than 10% of the Canadian telecommunications market from foreign investment restrictions measured by revenue. U.S. and other foreign companies can enter Canada today, either as a startup or through acquisition. As an example, Zayo Group acquired Allstream in early 2016. If the rules were changed to permit U.S. companies to acquire Bell, TELUS, or Rogers, this would not promote a more competitive supply of telecommunications services, but instead would simply replace one large provider with another. The second objective I will comment on is the desire of the USTR to secure commitments to provide reasonable network access for telecommunications suppliers through interconnection and access to physical facilities and scarce resources. This regime is already in place. The CRTC has implemented well-established rules of regulated access, including mandated tariffs for telecommunications suppliers to interconnection services, as well as access to essential physical facilities. This regime is used today by literally hundreds of foreign and domestic telecom service providers operating in Canada. Zayo is an example of a U.S. company that uses these rules and has participated in their formulation by the CRTC. Lastly, I would like to voice Rogers' support for the emphasis the Minister of Global Affairs is placing on the maintenance of the cultural exception in NAFTA. Some parties in the USTR process called for the liberalization of foreign ownership rules as they pertain to broadcasting, as well as modifications to Section 19.1 of the Income Tax Act. Others went further and asked that the cultural exception be modified to improve market access for U.S. goods or be eliminated altogether. In our view, Section 19.1 of the Income Tax Act, as well as the foreign ownership rules that flow from the direction to the CRTC regarding ineligibility of non-Canadians, are important components of the cultural exception. The foreign ownership rules exist in part to ensure that, as Section 3 of the Broadcasting Act stipulates, the Canadian broadcasting system shall be effectively owned and controlled by Canadians. This enables the various players who contribute to the health and success of the system to fulfill cultural policy goals for the benefit of all Canadians. With respect to Section 19.1 of the Income Tax Act, we believe it should be strengthened to also apply to foreign digital players, not eliminated.
Excuse me, you ready to almost wrapping up?
Yep, it provides important leverage for Canadian content creators when competing with the U.S. multinationals for digital advertising dollars. Thank you for your time. I am happy to take your questions.
Thank you. And we're going to move over to BCE Incorporated, and we have the Senior Vice President of Regulatory Affairs, Mr. Malcolmson. You got the floor. Go ahead, sir.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, honorable members of the committee. My name is Robert Malcolmson. I'm Senior Vice President, Regulatory Affairs at BCE. Thank you for your invitation to provide Bell's views on NAFTA. Bell is Canada's largest communications company, employing over 50,000 Canadians and investing over $4 billion annually in advanced networks and media content alone. These investments allow us to provide services that form the backbone of Canada's digital and innovation economy, including the country's fastest high-speed internet and wireless networks that are among the fastest in the world. Our world-class telecommunications system has been built through facilities-based competition among domestic players, overseen by an independent regulator, the CRTC. We urge you to keep in mind that in renegotiating NAFTA, we should not jeopardize what's been achieved by agreeing to trade outcomes that reduce the discretion of the independent regulator or grant subsidized access to our networks to foreign players. Instead, the focus should continue to be on facilities-based competition. Bell is equally a key supporter of Canada's cultural and democratic system, investing more than any other broadcaster in Canadian content and operating the largest networks of both local TV and local radio stations across the country, ensuring there are reporters with boots on the ground everywhere. Again, as you navigate the waters of a new NAFTA, it is essential that our cultural sovereignty be preserved and supported. There is no doubt that our system is in a time of transition as content from all over the world becomes available, audiences fragment, and activity moves online. We are responding. At Bell Media, we've launched Crave TV, a made-in-Canada over-the-top service that delivers premium TV content to anyone in Canada for just $7.99 a month. Meanwhile, Bell TV has launched Fibe Alt TV, an application-based TV service that delivers all the content consumers have come to expect from a traditional cable service without the need for a traditional receiver. We're also investing in a new era of Canadian content with award-winning Canadian programs like Letterkenny, which was produced exclusively for Crave TV and is its most-watched show, and Cardinal, which is one of the top new programs in Canada, averaging more than 1 million viewers each week, and is now broadcast in markets around the world. As the Canadian broadcasting system reorients itself toward online and global markets, we urge the government not to lose sight of this framework, reflected both in the original Free Trade Agreement and subsequently in NAFTA that has led to our success so far. We have 3 specific proposals on how to make NAFTA work better for Canadian culture and the digital economy. First, tax and regulatory fairness for online services and digital advertising platforms. Canadian-owned services like Crave collect and remit HST on behalf of the government, but foreign video providers like Netflix and foreign digital advertising platforms like Google and Facebook, despite competing in Canada and earning millions of dollars in revenue from Canadians every month, pay no sales tax at all. This is obviously not tax fairness, and Canada must maintain the ability to address this inequity with new modernized tax laws. In negotiating NAFTA, the government should ensure its ability to apply the same regulatory rules to all online services. Secondly, copyright enforcement. U.S. interests have long complained that widespread online copyright infringement here in Canada is limiting the growth of the digital economy. In fact, many of the most prominent global players in the piracy ecosystem operate out of Canada as a relative safe harbor, and Canadians made 1.88 billion visits to piracy sites last year. We recommend that the government commit to stronger intellectual property enforcement by having an administrative agency dedicated to such enforcement and by prioritizing enforcement against digital pirates. Canada should also create a criminal provision for any infringement of copyright, including facilitating and enabling piracy where it's undertaken for a commercial purpose. And finally, Mr. Chairman, local television. There is no doubt that local TV continues to face a crisis in Canada. Private local TV stations produce more than 900 hours of local programming every week and remain among the most popular TV stations in the country. Yet, despite the success in serving Canadians, private local TV stations have lost more than $500 million in the last 2 years. Despite their valuable content, local TV stations cannot charge subscription fees because of Section 31 of the Copyright Act. In renegotiating NAFTA, Canada should preserve its ability to address the crisis in local TV, either by removing Section 31 of the Copyright Act or making a second revenue stream available to local Canadian stations. And finally, it's also essential that Canada commit to preserving simultaneous substitution. Simultaneous substitution enables U.S. copyright holders to receive full value for their copyright, and it protects the integrity of the exclusive program rights that Canadian broadcasters purchase. Simultaneous substitution and other domestic measures should continue to be protected under NAFTA's existing cultural industries exemption. Thank you for the opportunity to provide our views, and we're happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, sir. And we're going to move over to Jason Lance. You're the chairman of the Alberta Barley, right?
Thank you.
Well, welcome, sir, and you got the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Good afternoon, and thank you for the invitation to appear today. I am here to offer the support of Alberta Barley's 11,000-plus farmer members for the modernization of the NAFTA and to provide our views on what we believe the negotiations need to achieve. Barley is an excellent example of how integrated the North American agricultural market is. Together, the U.S. and Mexico accounted for 21% of Alberta barley's exports in 2016. Every year, Alberta exports more than $190 million worth of barley and value-added products to the U.S. Most of that is through malt and meat. Both are value-added barley products. As I'm sure you know, Western Canada produces the world's highest quality malting barley. Thanks in part to NAFTA, Alberta farmers grow malting barley, have it trucked to those malt houses on the prairies, where it's processed and then shipped into the U.S., where it is then used by large-scale and craft brewers alike to produce a beer that satisfies the U.S. consumer's thirst for quality craft and adjunct beer. Apart from the malting sales, Alberta farmers sell the majority of their barley as feed to livestock producers. The beef industry is a core customer for Alberta barley, and we need Canadian beef ranchers and processors to have that seamless border with the critical U.S. market in order for the demand for our feed barley to stay strong. Like the vast majority of Canadian farmers, Alberta barley growers rely on open markets for our positive bottom line. Barley growers have benefited significantly from the NAFTA through tariff-free trading in comparison to other barley-growing regions in the world. Canada holds over 90% of a volume share of barley imports into the U.S. Our priority for the renegotiation is to make sure that this competitive advantage is not eroded in any way. We encourage negotiators to keep most of the agreement intact, including the existing duty-free access, the treatment of non-tariff barriers in Chapter 9, and the text on rules of origin. We also see great potential to make improvements related to the non-tariff barriers. Alberta Barley recommends that a modernized NAFTA contain the following items, which I will expand on momentarily, and our list includes an improved chapter on sanitary and phytosanitary, or SPS, rules, measures to more closely harmonize pesticide regulations and remove maximum residue limits related trade barriers, an agreement on the treatment of new plant breeding techniques, and a mechanism for cooperation on plant biotechnology in the low-level presence policy. While NAFTA's SPS chapter provides a good foundation, a renegotiated NAFTA should include stronger SPS measures in line with the other recently negotiated FTAs. The Trans-Pacific Partnership SPS chapter serves as a very useful example and should be a starting point for the negotiations. On MRLs, the NAFTA renegotiation presents a unique opportunity for Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. to come together to completely remove trade barriers related to pesticides and crop inputs, including techniques. A framework to manage new plant breeding techniques emerging across North America would also be of tremendous value. We would ask that negotiators put forward text within the agreement to facilitate the approval and trade of new plant breeding techniques among NAFTA partners. Finally, Canada, the U.S., and Mexico have a long-standing collaboration for removing biotech-related barriers to trade. The fact that never has one NAFTA partner regulator approved and then another rejected a new biotech trait in plant products underscores the need to formally recognize one another's approvals. At the very least, a common low-level presence policy should be a fallback objective for negotiators in a modernized NAFTA. Growers are in the middle of harvest right now, and so our collective thoughts are focused on realizing a successful year for our businesses and families. I hope that my presence here demonstrates how critical barley farmers believe the NAFTA talks are to all of us. We ask that this committee seek to enhance our market access and trade-related regulatory collaboration with the U.S. and Mexico through its recommendations on these negotiations. Thank you, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you, sir. And before we go to the dialogue with the MPs, I got a couple quick questions for you. You mentioned you're into harvest. How is the volumes, and how is the harvest going, and how is the prices? I guess the three questions you would ask as a farmer.
Well, it's a three-part question, but the most important is certainly weather-wise. Harvest in Alberta has got underway. Very dry in southern Alberta, so their harvest is just about wrapped up. As you move north, harvest is probably, I'm going to guess, 50%. Most of the wheat and barley is off, and canola. Canola has yet to come. So it's raining there today, so the one thing that's not in our control is the weather, and that's always the biggest factor. So prices have been pretty decent over the last year.
Good. So everything's looking good.
Yeah.
Great. So we're going to start with the MPs here, and we're going to start off with the Conservatives first, and we got Mr. Kerry. You've got the floor for 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I'm going to try not to talk very much because 5 minutes, I got so many questions for you guys. So first one, would you say there's a need for dedicated enforcement with respect to digital piracy, and what would be the best course of action? And the second question, basically, all these new technologies, like you look at when NAFTA was originally negotiated, who would have foreseen, things like Netflix and things along those lines? But how do you proactively address these new technological innovations through NAFTA? And how do you address those who wish to circumvent paying for content? So maybe we'll start with Mr. Malcolmson on that one.
Sure, thank you. So dealing with the second part of your question first, how do we improve attempts to circumvent digital locks? I think that can be a bit of a rabbit hole in the sense that as soon as you come up with one technological improvement, another way to circumvent arises. So from our perspective, and we've looked at the issue of piracy quite seriously because it's affecting our business. It's affecting our cable distribution business much in the same way as it is Miss Dinsmore's, because people are actually leaving the regulated system not just because they want to watch Netflix, but because they want to watch free content. And unfortunately, in the world we live in, piracy has become ubiquitous. So there are set-top boxes that are being sold in any electronic store on virtually every corner in a city, where you can buy something called a Kodi box that comes preloaded with content we own the copyright in, and Rogers owns the copyright in. You can buy that for $50, and you can watch live TV for free. So our view on how we solve the piracy problem is it's not sort of coming up with new technological measures, it's blocking access to piracy. And how do you do that? We would like to see measures put in place whereby internet service providers, all internet service providers, are required to block consumer access to pirated websites. In our view, that's the only way you stop it. So you would mandate all ISPs across the country to essentially block access to a blacklist of egregious piracy sites. So that would be job number one.
Okay, Ms. Dinsmore, do you concur?
We're looking at a variety of options to deal with this streaming phenomenon that Rob is addressing, which has really arisen very quickly since our own Copyright Act came into place. I think where we might differ is that we consider that any option that we might look at here in Canada is something that we should give careful consideration to under the auspices of the Copyright Modernization Act review, which is going to kick off in 2 months. So rather than looking to NAFTA to have this imposed on us by a trade agreement where this could be a bargaining chip that we agree to in exchange for something else, we think it has to be done holistically, given the careful balance that was arrived at in our Copyright Act between users and rights holders. So rather than sort of dealing with it as a one-off in this exchange, where this negotiation is moving very quickly, and even the negotiators will tell you that they don't really have a lot of time to think between rounds. There will be lots of time to consider these sorts of options in our own domestic forum, and we think that's where this discussion belongs.
So from what you're saying, really, you don't think NAFTA is the place to even be looking at these issues?
We don't think it's something that should. We don't think it's something that the proper place is in NAFTA. We think the proper place is in our own domestic review.
All right. That next question was, I always hear this all the time, how Canadians pay the highest prices in the world. I think they said Canada, the highest basic cell phone service. The average Canadian pays $96 in comparison to $42 in the UK. We know the Americans want to open up this market. Wouldn't that encourage competition and lower prices for consumers?
I can take this one. Not necessarily so. As you know, right now we have the 10% cap on foreign telecom providers coming into Canada. So today Verizon could come in, as could any startup. What they can't do is buy Rogers, Bell, or Telus, because they can't buy an existing player that's got greater than 10% of the overall revenue, which all three companies do. So Verizon could come in today if they wish to. They would come in with less than 10% market share, and they could build up their business here, and they could offer that sort of plan. But what they can't do is take over an existing player. The idea that an existing player would come into Canada and necessarily provide the same sort of pricing that they do in the U.S. is probably flawed for a number of reasons. The first is that we have a very different geography than the United States. It's very densely populated down there, whereas we have a very large country to cover with our networks, which allows them potentially to provide lower prices than we do up here. Secondly, we do have very high-quality networks, so if any of these providers come up here, they're going to have to maintain those networks and maintain the quality that Canadians have come to expect. So, we do offer low-cost options. Rogers has a $10 talk and text plan. We've got a $25 talk, text, and data plan. So we already are providing options at the lower end of the spectrum that are affordable for Canadians. So we don't think that, on the face of it, it looks very attractive, but really we don't think that, A, these players haven't come, and they can, and B, if they did, we don't think they'd offer the same low-cost offers they offer in the U.S.
Thank you. We're kind of over time, but that's fine. It was good dialogue, and we're going to move over to Mr. Dhaliwal. You got the floor, sir. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome to the presenters here. Mr. Malcolm Malcolmson, you were mentioning about the cultural sovereignty and the democratic system, and you were also mentioning that the local TV face crisis in Canada. But I'm certain that, at least colleagues on this side and some on the other side will agree that the local TV and the local radio is critical to preserving that cultural sovereignty as well as the democratic system. Could you explain what can be done to support and enhance the local TV so they are able not only to survive, but in fact they're able to thrive and employ more Canadians?
Sure, and thank you for the question. So this is actually, the reason we brought it up in the context of NAFTA is this is actually an issue where I think Canadian interests and U.S. interests can be somewhat aligned. And what I mean by that is you've seen the submissions from some of the U.S. broadcast groups, the National Association of Broadcasters, who represent U.S. over-the-air border stations that spill into Canada. And they've long complained that they're carried by cable distribution systems in Canada for free. So they're not paid for their signal in Canada. Similarly, we operate over-the-air stations in Canada, and cable companies can pick them up and distribute them, and we're not paid for that content. And that's completely unlike other channels. So if for example, you take a TSN or a Sportsnet, those channels have two sources of revenue. They have advertising revenue and they have subscription revenue. So every cable subscriber in Canada pays a fee to their cable provider. A portion of that goes back to TSN or to Sportsnet. Not true for over-the-air television stations, all of which are carried on cable. The reason that oddity exists is Section 31 of our Copyright Act gives cable systems the right to retransmit over-the-air signals for free. So we would say that we could solve the U.S. problem, we could solve the Canadian problem if we eliminated Section 31 of the Copyright Act and simply allowed over-the-air stations to negotiate with cable companies the fair value of their signal. So, and that regime exists in the U.S. It's called a retransmission consent regime. NBC Buffalo goes and negotiates with the local Buffalo cable company. They come to an agreement. If they don't come to an agreement, then the signal isn't carried. We would like that opportunity for our stations in Canada. That'll give us access to the same revenue stream that our competitor channels have, and it will give us fair remuneration for what's a very valuable product to Canadians, allow us to continue to fund local news and employ Canadians in local markets.
Ms. Dinsmore, you have further to add?
We set out in our opening remarks that we are very concerned about a retransmission consent regime. Certainly it is what the NAB asked for in this process, and it would mean a major outflow in that context of monies down south of the border. We've been carrying the ABC, CBS, Fox, NBC for 70 years under the current regime. It's not a regime that has been extended to Canadian broadcasters. We do have a retransmission regime, but that compensates the underlying program suppliers when their signals are carried out of market. That was the underpinnings of us having a copyright board. We think there are other ways to go at this. We think that some of the suggestions we provided to Madame Joly in her consultation, and which may be reflected next week when we hear from her, would be a better way to address this and wouldn't result necessarily in these costs being passed on to consumers, which is what you're going to have in any retransmission consent regime. It's simply going to increase the cost of cable. So some of the other suggestions are looking at the proceeds of the 600 megahertz auction to allocate some of those proceeds to local television. Equally, as we've talked about, expanding Section 19.1 of the Income Tax Act to digital advertising is another way we could repatriate dollars that could be then put into the system. So there are other more creative ways we think that would not have the same customer impacts as what was outlined by Mr. Malcolmson.
And when it comes to online video providers, how can we have more content in there? Or how we can encourage more Canadian content to be in those videos?
Radio providers? Online video providers. Well, as you probably know, the Commission has a digital media exemption order, which exempts the likes of Netflix from regulation. So it doesn't have the same obligations that our own Canadian broadcasters have. So there would have to be some sort of requirements put into that exemption order on Canadian content. They do distribute some Canadian content. We know that they have deals with Canadian producers, and that's good, but they don't have any formal requirements at this point, and they don't have to have any to be subject to the exemption order.
Wraps up, Mr. Dhaliwal. We're going to move to the NDP now. Madam Ramsey, you got 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Hello, everyone. I apologize for being late. I had to present something in the House, but I do appreciate your testimony, and certainly, Mr. Lenz, I appreciate you being here during harvest season. I represent a rural riding. I know how critical this time of year is. The report that you mentioned, are you able to submit that to the committee, please? Because it's quite detailed around the things that you mentioned, and they are things that we have heard at this committee before around the non-tariff barriers. So if you could please submit that, it would be appreciated. Sure. So my question to Mr. Malcolmson and Ms. Dinsmore is really about NAFTA and talking about telecommunications and the cultural exemption that we have here. How important is it for Canadian negotiators to maintain a clear cultural exemption in a renegotiated NAFTA?
Why don't I start? Pam will no doubt add. So from our perspective, it's extremely important. The cultural exemption has served our broadcasting system very well. We have a Canadian broadcasting ecosystem that, you know, some in other countries would marvel at in terms of its ability to create and disseminate truly homegrown Canadian content when we live next door to the largest entertainment production capital of the world. So, and it's that cultural exemption that's allowed us to achieve that. It's allowed us to achieve that through things like simultaneous substitution, which I mentioned in my presentation, that allows over-the-air stations to monetize their content by substituting Canadian ads over U.S. ads. It's achieved that through the restrictions on foreign ownership so that we have a Canadian owned and controlled ecosystem. And I think it's that cultural exemption that's the umbrella that covers our complete ability to have that owned and controlled, made in Canada ecosystem.
I think if we didn't have the cultural exemption, it would be very hard for our sort of Indigenous Canadian broadcasters to survive. It would be very hard to maintain our Canadian rights market and the whole underpinnings of what we know as our broadcasting system would probably fall apart. So it's extremely important.
Okay. Thank you. I also represent a border riding, and so I know about international roaming rates and things that happen when you get too close even to the border, because we have the Detroit River that's quite narrow between Detroit and Windsor down there. So I really want to ask you about that cross-border transfer of digital information. What concerns did you have with the USTR recommendations to lift the restrictions on measures that regulate cross-border data flows and do not require the use of installation of local computing facilities?
So is that in reference to roaming and roaming charges?
Yes.
You know, we have well-established agreements with many partners in Mexico and the United States for roaming. These are commercially arrived at. And, you know, we believe that previously there were a lot of customer irritants about roaming. But in the last couple of years, certainly our company has introduced a product called Roam Like Home, which is really a seamless approach to roaming. Basically, as you enter the States, you pay a daily charge, but you're otherwise on your existing roaming plan in Canada. And that charge is actually, for example, in the U.S. it's $6 a day, but after the 10th day, the rest of the month is sort of free. So I know in the EU, there have been calls, or there are no roaming charges as between countries there, but in our view, the kind of solution that we've come up with here in Canada and the kind of solution that we offer to our customers is more than acceptable.
In your presentation, you mentioned, Mr. Malcolmson, you were talking about the piracy, and my colleague asked you about that as well. And I hear what you're saying about this potential blocking of piracy sites. And I'm wondering if you could elaborate on who you think would determine, you know, which sites to include. And then, of course, we're under tremendous pressure from the U.S. to completely allow, you know, a more of an open system. And I know that one of you referenced the notice and notice versus the notice and takedown. So are you, I missed the portion and I apologize, is it that you're advocating to keep the notice and notice system that we have in Canada, because we heard earlier about that this week? So any thoughts on that you could share with us?
So on notice and notice, we think that it it works, but it's not like any solution, it's not necessarily a perfect solution, so continue to support it. But our view is that if we really are going to tackle piracy, as I said, the most efficient, effective solution is to have ISPs required to block egregious piracy websites. And you asked, well, who's going to make the
Yeah, who would
determination?
determine, right, that they were...
And in our view, it would be an independent agency that would be charged with that task. You certainly wouldn't want the ISPs acting as censors as to what content is pirate content, but surely an independent third-party agency could be formed, could create a blacklist of pirate sites, and then the ISPs would be required to block it. So that's, at a high level, how we would see it unfolding, perhaps overseen by a regulator like the CRTC, but that's how we see it unfolding.
Okay, any comments?
Just to weigh in on the notice and notice, I can tell you that since that regime has been formalized in the Copyright Modernization Act, the amount of usage has increased. For example, for us, back in 2015, we had over 1.5 million notices that we handled in the course of a year. The next year, in 2016, it was over 2.5 million notices that we handled. That's about 200,000 notices a month. So the fact is the notice and notice regime is being used, and incrementally so year over year. I think it is, certainly we're always open to talking about measures that might improve the system, and that's going to be the opportunity that we're going to have come November when we kick off the review of the Act. But it is certainly, there are a lot of participants in the system as we speak.
Thank you, and it's well over time, but it was good stuff, and we're going to move over to the Liberals again, and Mr. Peterson, you got the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm going to ask Mr. Lenz a quick question here. I think you alluded to 21% of your sales go to Mexico and the U.S. That's combined?
Yes.
That's good. So that's a large chunk. You mentioned about the SPS rules and how you thought the TPP was a good model. Is there improvements you'd like to see in that provision in TPP if we go forward in NAFTA, or is it sort of that's pretty good the way it is, or is there things we can tweak even in that model?
No, we view what has already been negotiated in that TPP as a very good starting point for the modernization of the NAFTA rules around SPS. So I think that's, in our view, that's probably, like I said, a very good starting point, and it works for our industry right now.
Okay, that's good. Thank you for that. I wanted to quickly talk to the telecoms here a little bit about culture. Some of my colleagues have touched on it already. But clearly we're living in a different age now than when NAFTA was first drafted. And I think that there's been a dramatic impact on culture, our cultural industries and Canadian content. So what steps do you think we could take to ensure that our Canada's cultural industries, in television, movies, music, whatever, however you want to describe it, but we'll be able to thrive in whatever new agreement comes? Not only survive, but I'm talking thrive. And of course, it's also a global. There's also a global market now for Canadian productions, and I'm wondering how perhaps we can use NAFTA to tap into that if we can. What recommendations do you have generally that might be able to sort of achieve those goals?
I'll tackle one specific issue first that you should think about. As the dissemination of content moves online, as you say, we're moving out of the traditional ecosystem. So, we've tried to, and we have launched an online product called Crave TV, which is our answer to Netflix. And it's been very successful in its own right, not on the scale of Netflix. But if you look at what Netflix has 5 million subscribers in Canada, charges $10.99 a month, and doesn't charge or remit HST. Crave, on the other hand, operating, let's say, just using Ontario as an example, operates at a 13% cost disadvantage in terms of its pricing. So you ask how we can facilitate the strengthening of domestic content disseminators here and now in an efficient manner. One way to do that would be to require the Netflixes of the world, the Googles and Facebooks of the world to charge and remit tax at the same basis that Canadian entities do. So that's one. And then again, you asked about the opportunities for export. Certainly, as Canada's largest broadcaster, we're very enthusiastic about those, but the domestic ecosystem needs to be fixed first. So I referred to local TV. That local TV needs help, and there are ways to help it, as I said, allowing it to charge a subscription fee, and at the same time, in the context of NAFTA, that might be of appeal to your American partners, and so that their border stations could charge as well. So those are two sort of, I think, quick, efficient fixes. Okay. Pam may have other views.
I just think more generally, we've got to work very hard to keep our carve-out. I mean, that's crucial. I think that's really what everyone's asking for. The fact that there's a retaliation, the ability to retaliate on the U.S. side if we introduce new measures is probably something that we'd like to do away with, so it wasn't subject to that. But I think even at a bare minimum, just the mere fact of being able to keep this reservation, or not even reservation, this carve-out exception in these discussions, I think is the most important thing.
That's good. Well, I mean, I think it's fair to say that if Canadians don't tell their stories, who will? And I mean, so we need to make sure that whatever comes to this, that's protected, I think. I was going to ask briefly, but I'm probably running out of time.
Half minute if you want a quick
Just about, there's obviously capital investment that needs to be made when it comes to digital as well, and ensuring that facilities-based investment is available in the context of NAFTA and the investments that both of your companies need to make to ensure that the networks are viable and all these huge capital investments. Do you see NAFTA as being able to improve that relationship at all, or is it that regime?
Well, I guess the lens we look at it from is we worry about NAFTA resulting in subsidized access by non-Canadian entities to the networks that Bell and Rogers and TELUS have built in Canada. So our preoccupation is in ensuring that there isn't sort of an unintended consequence here as a result of the renegotiation of NAFTA that results in, Verizon, for example, being able to come to Canada and ride on the Bell or the Rogers network. Right. In our mind, that would make no sense. We've built strong networks, invested in them. They employ thousands of Canadians. So, our preoccupation is making sure NAFTA doesn't detract from a very successful domestic facilities-based model.
Hey,
I won't ask about how my Maple Leafs are going to do this year.
Well, it looks like we're almost wrapped up, but I have two quick questions. I think it's all right for our MPs. Madam Point, you got a quick question, and then I'll go to Mr. Dreeshen for a quick question. Go ahead, Madam.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Thank you, Chair. It's important, given that I'm probably the only one who will be discussing the cultural exemption, but from a Francophone point of view. Madam Minister Jody mentioned that cable companies like you pay money that will allow for the creation of Canadian content. You explained earlier that you want, for example, Netflix to pay taxes. Let me get this clear. That would be a sales tax, right? It wouldn't be some compensation for Canadian content, which you actually do have to pay for or support. If we want, an exemption based on culture and Canadian content, I don't quite understand how the tax is going to be helping pay for Canadian content, a sales tax, just a sales tax.
Will not directly contribute to Canadian content. However, the sales tax will enable a service like Crave TV, which is a disseminator of Canadian content, which is owned and operated by a Canadian company. It will enable a company like that plays an important role in the content ecosystem to compete on a fairer playing field with Netflix, who operates at a
mais ça viendra pas régler le contenu canadien dans le. Right, but it's not going to do something really for Canadian content. There's a fund specifically for that, so it's not quite the same thing. It's been some time now that people have been leaving the cable and moving over to the internet, especially youth. So it seems to be really a very clear trend. Young people are not subscribing to cable services. This is something that's been a trend now for quite some time. You were saying that we're very far-flung as Canadians. There's a lot of space between one Canadian and another. I imagine that in the United States it's somewhat similar, and I think that they still are able to offer cheaper telephone services. Why?
I don't have the intimate knowledge of what the rates are being offered by wireless providers in the Midwest and the States. I do have knowledge about what we provide, and I can assure you that our plans are very affordable at the low end of the spectrum. So that's, I guess, the best I can offer on that one.
Est-ce que j'ai encore du temps, Monsieur le Président, parce que je peux continuer longtemps?
Do I still have time, Chair? Because I could go on for some time.
And we have to wrap up. We go ahead, Mr. Dreesen. You've got a couple minutes there.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate this opportunity, to speak to a fellow barley grower and a neighbor from my part of Alberta. Basically, some of the things, Jason, that you had talked about, the non-tariff barriers, maximum residue levels, issues like that, they kind of get thrown into the mix, and not a lot of people understand it unless they're in the business. I mean, so that's part of the non-tariff barriers. The others, other advantages and opportunities that we have are plant breeding techniques and trying to be able to work those into a North American context. And of course, in order to do that, you have to have a certain scale in order, so that can take place. And then the biotech barriers as well. So we have chemicals and chemicals that we can purchase, should be able to purchase coming across the U.S., but of course we have all these regulatory barriers that exist. And so trying to get into that sort of harmonization, I think, is a critical part. So I know that when you had responded to Ms. Ramsey earlier, you'd said you'd bring a report in, but I think it's important that people that perhaps aren't necessarily in the business have a little bit of an idea what some of the concerns are, because also as you're looking at the beef industry, I mean, they eat the barley that we grow. It's a wonder why it is that we only sell 21%, but I mean it goes in the form of protein in a different way. So I wonder if you could expand on some of that in the bit of time that the chair has allowed me.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for the question, Mr. Dreesen. Certainly, we're talking about the harmonization of, being able to move some of our crop inputs and biotech from one country into the other. That harmonization between our own PMRA and our sister organizations that are in the States and Mexico is very important to us as producers, because a lot of times those are tools that we can use on our farms to become more sustainable in what we're doing. And that's obviously a very important part for us. And on the biotech side, there's certainly, we have a very capable breeding system here in Canada. We want to make sure we encourage some private investment, maybe coming from down in the United States or Mexico, to allow us to have access to those not only improved breeding techniques, but through that it'll increase our yields. It'll allow us to have better disease management in our crops, which would also mean we could use less crop inputs, pesticides and that sort of thing. So that harmonization between both between our PMRA and those organizations that through NAFTA would be very critical and very vital to us.
Thank you.
That wraps up our first panel, and thank you folks for coming, and it was a good discussion, and we're just going to we have witnesses ready to come on board, so we're just going to break for 1 minute, suspend for 1 minute, and then we're going to go right back at it. Your seats, please. Okay, we're going into our second round now, and we have also three groups of witnesses for our second round, and this is continuing on our study for the people who have just joined us. This is continuing on our study for the future trade between Canada, Mexico, and the United States. So we have via video conference all the way from Montreal, Quebec, we have the Council of Canadians, Ms. Day. Thank you. And we have Federation of Business, Canadian Federation of Business, Corinne Pullman. And we also have Scott Vaughn from International Study of Sustainable Development. Maybe we'll go right to the video conference first in case we have glitches. It's better to do that first, I find. And as presenters here know, we try to keep it at 5 minutes or under if you can. And if you see my red light on, that means we're kind of time is up. But without further ado, and then after we'll have dialogue. And if there's something you didn't get in there or you want to add, you can always add when we get into the Q&A later on. So without further ado, we're going to go to the Council of Canadians. Go ahead, you got the floor.
Okay. Bonjour, mon nom est Sujata.
Hello, my name is Sujata Day, and I'm in charge of the campaign on international trade here at the Council of Canadians. I'll be presenting in English, but I'd be happy to answer your questions in French.
Full circle, the Council of Canadians was founded to fight the Canada-US Free Trade Agreement, which later became NAFTA. While there is much that has been changed over the 30 years, many of our concerns, our basic concerns about NAFTA have not. While some say that NAFTA is a win-win for the three countries, in reality it's been more of a win-win for the corporations of the three countries. During NAFTA, inequality in the US and Canada has risen. Mexico, that started in NAFTA with a 58% poverty rate, still has a 58% poverty rate. Environmental policies have been threatened by Chapter 11 lawsuits and by energy proportionality clauses. It is impossible for the government to talk about progressive trade, we feel, when there's no plans to remove these clauses. And today, there are many pundits who will say that NAFTA is now too big to fail. Where have we heard that before? That we must live in fear and dread about NAFTA's possible demise. Unfortunately, this logic puts Canada at a severe negotiating disadvantage. It locks us into accepting any demand at the negotiation table. Instead, NAFTA negotiation must set the course for a very different type of deal. If Canada does not achieve an ambitious deal which protects Canadians and the environment, we must simply walk away. And this is not just me saying it, it's the C.D. Howe Institute. There are many people who have also been saying the same thing. And we're not the only ones. An overwhelming majority of what people we polled agree. We commissioned a poll with ECOS Research that we just launched today. 76% agreed with the statement. In the event that NAFTA negotiations result in a bad deal for Canadians and the environment, Canada should walk away from the deal. This statement was supported regardless of political affiliation. 69% of Conservatives, 77% of Liberals, 80% of Bloc Québécois, 81% of the NDP, and 90% of Greens. In addition, we surveyed people on what they think of different prescriptions in NAFTA. 80% said that clauses in NAFTA that make water vulnerable to export and privatization should be removed. Remember, NAFTA's annex lists water as a tradable good. If any province allowed water exports, we'd be obligated to export water. Furthermore, with a proportionality clause, we would be forced to meet water export quotas. Our honorary chairperson, Maud Barlow, former senior UN advisor on water, has devoted many decades of her life to this issue. In our poll, 70% said that we must remove energy proportionality provisions, which lock Canada into maintaining energy export quotas to the United States. These energy quotas make it hard for Canada to transition away from fossil fuels and the tar sands. It makes it harder for us to meet our Paris climate change commitments. Lastly, we asked people what they thought about Chapter 11, the clause that allows corporations to sue states over policy changes. They were clear. They did not want tweaks to Chapter 11. They did not want the CETA investor court system. They wanted it eliminated. 63% said that Chapter 11 provisions that allow corporations to sue states should be eliminated from the deal. Therefore, we think that the U.S. Trade Representative proposal for an ISDS opt-in looks promising, since it could effectively disarm Chapter 11. It is one that Canada should welcome. The results of our online poll are available on our website, and as you will see, it's very consistent in terms of region, age group, and political leaning. We should not live in the fear of a Trump tariff, nor should we put up meek and unbinding projects that do not substantially change the deal. People are asking the government to make major changes in NAFTA, and they need to be heard. And you can find out more about our campaign, fact sheets, and videos on our website at canadians.org/NAFTA. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for being on time. It's good. We're going to move on now to the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, and go ahead, Ms. Pullman. And I'm honored to be part of your membership for over 30-some years. It's a good organization. You guys do your homework, so go ahead. You got the floor.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you for the opportunity to be here today to present the CFAB's perspective on NAFTA. You should have a slide presentation in front of you that I just want to walk you through very quickly. First, CFAB is a not-for-profit, nonpartisan organization that represents more than 109,000 small and medium-sized businesses across Canada. Our members represent all sectors of the economy, and they're found in every region of the country. It's important to remember that Canada's SMEs employ 90% of Canadians that are working in the private sector, and they're responsible for the bulk of job creation in Canada. So addressing issues of importance to them can actually have widespread impacts on job creation and the economy overall. Canada is a trading nation. Every year, billions of dollars of goods and services flow through our border, and many jobs depend on the vitality of our trade relationships. To better understand our members' perspective on NAFTA, we conducted a survey in May that got almost 4,400 responses. As you can see on slide 3, 63% of the survey respondents had experience importing from the United States, and 28% had experience exporting to the United States, and 3.5% had experience importing from Mexico, and 5% had experience exporting to Mexico. As the USA is our largest trading partner, changes to NAFTA have the potential to seriously impact how we do business. Uncertainty in this area makes it difficult for Canada's SMEs to plan for the future. In fact, as you can see on slide 4, more than 1 in 4 businesses are already looking to alter their trade plans, with another 42% not yet knowing if they will. Only 30% were confident that their trade plans would continue as is. Now, this reaction should not come as a surprise, as getting involved in trade, even when there is more certainty, is not easy for smaller firms. As you can see on slide 5, there are almost always challenges that smaller businesses must try to overcome. Some will not be solved by trade agreements, such as currency fluctuations, but others, such as the cost of shipping, duties and taxes, and understanding rules and regulations, can certainly be addressed to some degree by successful trade agreements. And so these are among the areas we're seeking governments to address in this renegotiation of NAFTA. But it should be noted that most get involved in exporting because they see a growing market demand for their product or service, they want to expand their business, or they see good potential market opportunity, as you can see on slide 6. However, more than 1/3 also cited favorable free trade agreements as having an influence on their intention to export. So addressing SME trade priorities could encourage even more to engage in trade. So our survey garnered more than 100 pages of comments on how NAFTA could be improved, and many common themes emerged. Slides 7 and 8 provide a summary of the most important priorities to address in these NAFTA negotiations that would assist small and medium-sized businesses. They include having a chapter specifically addressing the needs and particular challenges faced by small businesses. It could include a series of commitments and principles that all parties agree to, and we've suggested a few in a submission that we've also circulated to the committee members. We also think that we need to ensure that the current range of duty-free goods within North America remain as is or be expanded. Many small business owners stated how important the agreement was in making them competitive, and losing this advantage would be devastating to their business. Focus on simplifying the rules with the aim of reducing the overall administrative burden for small businesses involved in trade is another area. Our submission outlines some very specific examples raised by members in our survey that could be addressed. And sometimes the toughest issues small businesses face are the myriad of taxes and rules at the state level and provincial levels of government. So we would encourage governments to find ways to include subnational levels of government when working towards regulatory cooperation of tax and regulatory systems across all those multiple levels of government. We would also strongly discourage changes that would complicate or tighten the rules of origin. Many expressed alarm that the NAFTA renegotiation can further complicate what is already a very daunting task for many SMEs. Rules of origin should be easy to understand, clearly communicated, and include solid examples of what is required. Now, some of the most frustrating aspects of trade are the paperwork and processes businesses must follow to get people or products across borders. Making border processes easier should include better customer service, easier and timelier access to information resources, and quicker response times to business inquiries. Also, truck transportation is vital. It's a vital aspect of free trade in North America. While we understand the importance of safe and secure borders, NAFTA should look at ways to improve the speed at which trucks are able to cross those borders. This could include looking at how well trade facilitation programs, such as the FAST program, serve their intended purpose and ensure that they're easy to access and more tailored to the needs of small firms. Finally, also, many small businesses told us that there's a lack of clarity as to what visa may be required or not required for various types of labor to cross the border, which is often compounded by the uncertainty as to how the CBSA or the U.S. Customs Border Protection will react to those. Even when their paperwork is in order, there are sometimes complications that cause delays in what should be an otherwise simple and straightforward process. The federal government should ensure that the free flow of labor remains an important component of NAFTA and work to improve and clarify labor mobility rules. Finally, we need to look at ways to modernize NAFTA. E-commerce may be best illustrate a technological advancement that should potentially be included as part of any free trade agreement. However, any new provisions related to e-commerce should be balanced with the needs of bricks and mortar businesses that have to compete with those online businesses. There's much more information on each of these items in the submission that we've provided to you here today, as well as many member comments, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and we're moving along pretty good here. We're going to move over to our last panelist from the International Institute of Sustainable Development. Mr. Vaughan, you got the floor.
Mr. Chair, thanks very much, honourable members. Thanks for inviting me. I wanted to make 3 brief points. So the first is in 1994, when NAFTA and its environmental side agreement at that point broke new ground in aligning trade and environmental issues. And at a minimum, those environmental provisions that currently exist within NAFTA and its side agreement should not be weakened with backsliding in the renegotiations. But I think more importantly, Mr. Chair, these negotiations offer a unique window to craft a new NAFTA for the next quarter century. We live in a different world from 1994. The science of global environmental change is robust. The economics of the cost of pollution and the benefits of avoided ecological damage are extensive. International markets and international trade in green, low-carbon goods and services, as well as e-commerce, are rapidly expanding. And the engagement of the financial services sector in climate issues, as an investment bank CEO said yesterday at the World Economic Forum in New York, at a tipping point. Much of these actions are taking place under the umbrella not only of the Paris Climate Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals, but other commitments such as the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. NAFTA can and should be a catalyst to advance these commitments. My second point focuses more specifically on climate change. We applaud the Government of Canada's commitment to include climate as a core NAFTA objective. The European Union recently made a similar commitment to link trade, Paris, and the Sustainable Development Goals, primarily through trade-related standards. So some may argue that trade is not and should not be connected to climate issues. However, the International Monetary Fund and the World Economic Forum have identified climate change as the most pressing economic challenge of the 21st century and the biggest risk to big business stability today. So we need to reform core economic policies, including trade, in order to reduce climate risk and scale up joint action. So with that in mind, let me identify a couple of entry points. Disciplining environmentally damaging subsidies. The WTO and the GATT before it have talked about rules to reduce environmentally harmful subsidies for well over 2 decades. A new NAFTA ought to include disciplines to eliminate fossil fuel subsidies in accordance with G20 commitments. Carving out a NAFTA climate environmental goods and services list, either in a new energy chapter or through other chapters. The OECD, the WTO, APEC, and others have identified lists of traded goods and services as well as their tariff lines. NAFTA has the chance to accelerate trade in clean technologies through not only zero tariffs, but more importantly, eliminating non-tariff barriers within Canada and between Canada, US, and Mexico. Linking the financial services chapter with climate finance. Options include climate disclosures, supporting innovative financial instruments like green bonds, climate bonds, a sustainable development bond that the World Bank has just issued, as well as cross-border clean power purchase agreements and energy purchase agreements to scale up North American-wide renewable and energy efficiency activities. Establishing a North American climate forest sink and offset system. Francis Seymour, who was in Ottawa last week, reminds us that our forest represents the only proven climate capture and carbon capture and storage option that is affordable and known. So North America could be a leader, which would also help our important forestry industry. And finally, scaling up a North American climate adaptation, focusing on supply chains, trade corridors, and related vulnerable areas. The more frequent and severe extreme weather events that we say literally today are becoming the new norm tomorrow. Finally, Mr. Chair, I wanted to make a brief comment as well about investment. The current Chapter 11 was flawed from the outset by emphasizing investor rights without investor responsibilities. There have been several investor-state disputes that raise fundamental concerns with regards to the democratic right to regulate. NAFTA needs to reform. The CETA investment chapter provides a good basis. Moreover, the UN Commission on International Trade Law is discussing right now possible changes to investor-state dispute settlement. Mr. Chair, for more than 20 years, ISD has been actively engaged in trade and investment issues, beginning under the leadership of David Reynolds. I'd be glad to share the work that we've done with the clerk and related to our NAFTA analysis. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And we're going to go right into the dialogue with the MPs. And we got up first, we got the Conservative Party for 5 minutes. Mr. Allison, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and to all our witnesses, thanks for being here. And to Ms. Palmer, I want to direct my questions to you, as I know you guys well over the years. You talk about red tape. You guys sat on the Red Tape Commission. We worked together as an organization when we had that Red Tape Commission in the last government. Talk to me about anything specifically, because we have had organizations say, listen, red tape is an issue. So give us your thoughts specifically on what we should be looking at trying to address as it relates to red tape.
Well, red tape is a broad category and can include everything from obviously dealing with regulations. And again, we're not asking people to reduce regulations, but it's finding ways to simplify and cooperate so that you're not dealing with 3 different versions of a regulation when trying to trade in all 3 countries. If there's ways that we can either mutually recognize regulations between the countries so that businesses can maybe only have to do things one way, not 3 different ways, that's part of it. The second part of, I think, red tape has to do with the communications and customer service side of the equation, because too often that's a big part of why businesses have struggled with complying with regulations, because they don't understand what the rules are. There's not a lot of good explanations. It's not clear in the communications aspect of what they're supposed to do. I can tell you the vast majority, the 99.9% want to comply. It's sometimes just understanding what they need to do to comply that's the biggest issue. So for us, red tape goes well beyond just the regulations, and it goes on to how governments communicate those regulations and how businesses can access that information so that they can do it appropriately.
And you also suggested in your brief that we should be looking at the subnational level as well, so the state level. You want to expand on that?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think in a lot of trade agreements obviously look at things from the federal level, but in Canada, obviously, provincial level rules and regulations have almost a bigger impact on many smaller companies, and you could say the same in the United States at the state level. Often what we're hearing in some of the work that we did is it's confusing to know different states have different taxes, and understanding what their obligations are and paying those taxes is very confusing. Again, they're not suggesting they don't want to pay them. They just want to understand better what it is that they need to do in order to be able to sell their products in those states. And conversely, for American companies wanting to come into Canada, it's to be the same confusing matter. So bringing those subnational governments in is important. We know that in CETA that happened when the Canadian-European Trade Agreement. So why not use that as a model and potentially do that at the NAFTA table as well?
Good. I'm not going to let you get away without trying to make a comment on proposed small business tax changes here in Canada. I mean, one of the things that Mulroney did, the original free trade agreement, was to get rid of the manufacturer sales tax to make us more competitive. So any thoughts on proposed small business sales tax? I mean, we're competing with the U.S. as well as Mexico, so just your thoughts on what that could do to our competitiveness.
Well, overall, I mean, it's tough to compete these days, and I think any new measures that increase the cost of doing business can be difficult for smaller companies to absorb. So I would say it's not just the tax changes that have been recently proposed. Those certainly have an impact, but they are compounded with increases that we know are coming on payroll taxes, increases in some of the provincial mandated minimum wages. There's a number of factors that are currently coming at small business owners across Canada that are scaring many of them into understanding what they need to do in order to continue to operate their business. Many of them operate on very thin profit margins, and these I think, compounding of issues that are coming at them are what's scaring them. And the most recent tax changes, I think, are a bit of the I guess the straw that broke the camel's back kind of issue, because it's almost like there's been so many in the last 6 to 8 months that and again, it's not just federal, it's provincial, federal, even municipal property taxes that are just being compounded that are adding to the, I think, ongoing or continuing anxiety that we're seeing with small business owners.
Sure, and I got less than a minute left, so just maybe you gave us a whole list of great things that we need to work on, but what would you suggest is one of the things we must get right as we look at what we're going to do with NAFTA as we move forward?
It's hard to say because it really depends on so many things, but I think it's really about border processes and making sure that the agreement that stands today is going to be just as good, if not better, going forward. I mean, so many businesses are worried about what will happen if suddenly they no longer have access to the markets that they once did, or if they're not able to get the products they once were able to get without duty, and makes them less competitive globally. So these are, I think, factors that are the most important right now. They just would like to see at least the status quo continue, if not an improved agreement for Canadian businesses.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, and that wraps up your time pretty good. And we're going to move over to the Liberal Party now with Mr. Fonseca. You've got the floor. Go ahead, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. And, you know, it's so excellent to see just how engaged Canadians are, as well as our witnesses that represent their members, and the amount of work that they've done. And I think that that speaks to the maturity of NAFTA, 23 years, and what it's meant to Canada, to the United States, and to Mexico. But over those 23 years, many things have changed. We've entered this digital era. We're looking at more progressive trade agreements, and the types of questions that come about with NAFTA are somewhat different than what we experienced as we were going through our consultations with TPP. And it was good to see Ms. Day as well as Ms. Pullman that you had done a number of surveys with your members, and many are asking for the same things. And some of the surveys that we've heard is what Canadians want is not just a trade deal. They want a fair trade deal, and they are looking for a progressive trade deal, and that's what we want. We heard from the minister. The minister speaks to we will not just sign any deal. We will sign a deal that is good for Canadians, and in that's why a number of our priorities are progressive in the sense that the chapter on environment, labor, Indigenous, and I'd like to hear from Ms. Day. On those three, speaking of those three areas and those that are negotiating at the table, can you kind of put in priority what you would want to see on the environment, on labor, on Indigenous, what we would lead with?
Well, I think one of the things that's really important is that a lot of what happens in trade agreements can often be more symbolic. So the most important thing that I would put on the top of my list is binding and enforceable. For example, having the Paris Climate Agreement within the environment chapter of NAFTA would be a very important thing, but it would also be something that's binding. For example, when we look at CETA, there are many promises and there are many different claims about CETA, but nothing within the environment or sustainable development chapter in CETA is binding at all. In fact, what it says is that we recognize the Paris Climate Agreement. And so recognizing it is very different as saying there will be a penalty if you do not subscribe to it. The other thing we notice in these chapters, in the TPP as well, is that they will often say things like, we recognize that we will not change our standards, but we don't actually set what those standards are. Obviously, we don't, the reason is we don't want to say to other countries, this is what you want, this is what you should do. But on the other hand, there has to be some kind of mechanism, for example, to say to the country that is not meeting a certain minimum standard that we're going to add tariffs to you. You go ahead, keep your standard, but there are going to be definitely prices to pay for that. Same thing with Indigenous. The UNDRIP has to be part of this and part of an enforceable mechanism. Another thing we should also talk about too is governance, right? Because within these trade agreements, we're now shifting governance towards, from sovereign parliaments towards a trade agreement. So there has to be some kind of mechanism in it that our standards as Canadians, our parliamentary standards, are actually part of those agreements. And I just want to take something apart, which I hear a lot, because I hear many people say CETA is the most progressive agreement ever. And certainly there are some interesting points of CETA, but I think what you have to remember is that a lot of what is in CETA that people refer to as progressive is in the interpretative declaration that was made after the agreement was signed. Now, that is an agreement which sounds very nice, but the problem with that, it's not part of the agreement. It's only when there's something that's not clear in the agreement that it interprets that. And so it is something that is actually quite fluid, right? A lot of those principles are wonderful, recognizing precautionary principle in trade agreements, but none of that is actually enforceable. So I think the key for progressiveness is enforceability.
Thank you. My next question is for Ms. Pullman, and I'm going to take from my colleague here, Ms. Ludwig. She often talks about a smart, secure, strong border, as well as an efficient and smart border. And when it comes to that efficiency, can you share with us from your members, maybe over the last number of years, some of the things that have been done that have really improved the border, and what would be your priority in terms of with the border that would help us in terms of moving forward with more improvements?
Mr. Fonseca, you know better than ask a question when your 5 minutes is almost up, but I think it's up, and we're going to have to maybe punt that question to the next Liberal, because it's over 5 minutes, and I can't let that slip in there. So we'll just hang on to that. We're going to have to move over to the NDP now. Madam Ramsey, you've got the floor.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. I really want to start with the discussion around bulk water exports and the potential of that going forward. This isn't currently an issue that we are facing, but with climate change and what we're seeing around the globe with fires, and we have BC wildfires, and then we have, of course, the horrible earthquake that just happened in Mexico City, with drought being a potential result of climate change. I wonder, Ms. Day, and also I have to reference, obviously, I'm on a Great Lake, Lake Erie in my riding, which is the Great Lakes represent 1/5 of the freshwater supply in the world. So it's incredibly important that we have this shared body of water protected. So how does NAFTA make it difficult to stop bulk water exports, and why is this dangerous?
Okay, very much so. That's an interesting question, because what happens is you have to remember that water is becoming a multi-billion-dollar industry. I mean, there's even trading right now on futures of water. It's become an investment vehicle. So those are very important issues. So what happens is in NAFTA, in its annex, water is a tradable good. Now, right now, there's relatively no danger because all of the provincial laws are pretty harmonized, that they don't allow exports of bulk water. But if in any one jurisdiction did, then we are obligated. It's a good, so we're obligated to do that. And not only obligated, because we have energy proportionality in the agreement, that is also very dangerous, because we are then obligated to give a certain percentage of exports according to a formula. And the other problem is water is now becoming an investment vehicle. So what that means is that if we have an ISDS and Chapter 11 in it, we could have a Chapter 11 suit based on our control of our water resources.
Thank you for that. The other thing that I really want to dig into, I actually had a question today about, was Chapter 11 and the removal of Chapter 11. There's been a strong call for it, and I think you said 63% in your poll of Canadians indicated that they'd like to see this chapter removed. So there, of course, have been discussions about the ICS in CETA. So I wonder if you can speak to both the importance of the removal of Chapter 11 and the impact that it's had on Canadians, and also, whether or not you see ICS as being a solution for that.
Well, obviously, we're the most sued developed country in the world with 39 suits, a lot of them over our environmental policies. We have to remember that we are a resource economy. We have a lot of resources. So as we try to protect our resources, we will get more and more suits as we change laws and policies, especially when it comes to Indigenous people who are going to try and take control of their resources. This is a very important Trojan horse that could destroy a lot of our attempts to do good in the world, and that's what we feel that Canada wants to do, right? However, when you get to the CETA chapter of the investment court system, you have to remember it's a very, very controversial mechanism because it's still making the primacy of law over the investor rights. The investor rights are still given there and are higher than our other rights. So that is a major problem, and that's a problem as we go into environmental issues, inequality, because the problem in this world right now is not that investors have not enough power. The problem is that people in the environment don't necessarily have enough power. And so when we look at CETA, there's a few changes in terms of, okay, there's judges there, but there's the conflict of interests of the judges serving as judges and then serving as as lawyers is not there. There's still an incentive because these are very, very lucrative industry. It's $4 million a case to basically defend, to actually put those cases in. So it's still a very potent tool for corporations against the public interest. So that's a very important thing. So when we're looking at there's a very interesting proposal on the table from U.S. Trade Representative to actually have an opt-in to Chapter 11, and that's really interesting because that would effectively disable the Chapter 11. It would effectively mean that any country who didn't want it didn't have to do it. So we could totally do that, and that would set a wonderful precedent. You have to remember, this is not some crazy Council of Canadians radical statement. This is Australia has actual trade agreements with the United States without ISDS in it. That's a developed country. Brazil does not have any agreement with ISDS. There's a number of countries who are pulling out of their ISDS agreements. So if we're talking about being ambitious as Canadians, maybe that's an ambitious point where we can do something.
That pretty well sums her up there at the time, and we're going to move over to the last questioner, and that's Madam Ludwig. You got the floor.
Thank you. It's probably no surprise what my question might focus on. So thank you very much, all of you, for your presentations today. Certainly, yes, the border is an issue that we've heard from a number of witnesses. Like Ms. Ramsey, I represent an area that is on the border. I also am fortunate and sometimes unfortunate that being very involved with small businesses, we have two in the riding, and one of them is directly impacted with exports. So when we look at a smarter, more efficient border, my colleague had talked about the use of technology. And certainly technology, the current NAFTA agreement is nowhere near to keeping the pace with current technology. And I'm wondering if Mr. Vaughan and Ms. Pullman, if you could speak to the potential impact and opportunity for e-manifest, pre-clearance of goods and services, but also people, so that we can reduce the delays at the border and make us, the theme that I want to push on here is a stronger North American market, not a weaker North American market. Thank you.
Absolutely. I think technology could definitely be a tool that could be used much more effectively at the border than it currently is. The issue that we sometimes run into, however, is that often these tools are built with the big businesses in mind and the large amounts of goods that cross the border, and not so much the little independent that is only going to be sending a small amount across the border. So the paperwork, and even if it's going to be electronic, you still have to figure out how to fill out all the forms and fill out and so that's where I think we need to sort of rethink a little bit about how border processes affect smaller companies versus larger companies. companies. If you're trading the same product, but you're only doing it once a month, but it's pretty much just like, why do you have to fill out the same forms every single time, multiple times? And so that's what we're trying to get at, is trying to think a little bit differently about how smaller firms use the border processes versus large volume companies that are using it. And I think too often it's all built for the big, not thinking about the impacts on the small. And they still have to fill out the same forms, and it just takes a lot more time and a lot more effort, even if they are electronic. So I agree that technology can be used much more effectively than it is today, especially, and labor mobility is a key one.
Mm-hmm.
There, it's a lack of understanding what the rules are and inconsistency in how the rules are applied. So I think using technology might be one way to kind of bring some more consistency to that, because the way it is today, anecdotally, what we hear is that you get one answer from one border guard and a different answer from another, and it's really confusing. And so they try to find other ways to work around it, which is not ideal either. And so I think technology could potentially help alleviate some of that and just make it a lot more clear. So that's what we're hoping NAFTA the negotiations can do.
Thank you. And Mr. Bond?
Yeah, just very briefly, I was at a meeting yesterday in New York talking exactly about this with OECD and International Trade Center and the World Trade Organization. I'd recommend, there was a report that ITC came out in July 2017, and right now e-commerce represents about 12% of global trade, so trillions of dollars. But the connectivity gap between, as Ms. Pullman said, it's large-scale companies that are better suited for small and medium-sized enterprise. This connectivity gap remains a real issue. But the potential then is, and what ITC has shown is, deploying greater e-commerce, especially business-to-business opportunities, has shown to close also gender gaps within trade, as young entrepreneurial women, when they're using e-commerce, have more success in crossing borders than if they're doing it in person, particularly in developing countries. So again, just to agree with you, is that NAFTA could actually lead the world in connectivity.
Okay, great. And just adding on to that as well, in terms of a stronger North American region, I think there is an opportunity here certainly to modernize. And when we were in Washington, Chicago, and Detroit in early June, I mean, some of the themes that we've heard today we also heard in the U.S. So encouraging, the interest in focusing on the environment. One of the suggestions before the House Ways and Means Committee was to actually potentially look at NAFTA as a bit more of a nimble opportunity in terms of being able to make a bit more changes in the case of the use of technology. So perhaps not an entire chapter on technology, but looking at the agreement with a technological lens. The other area I wanted to speak with you about is the area of labor mobility. That was also raised as something to look at in the United States. And when we look at small businesses, the access to labor is an issue. When I hear, even in my region, on any given day, there are about 300 vacancies just in one of my counties with businesses. So in terms of trying to take greater advantages of NAFTA or CETA or the Ukraine agreement, could you speak to the challenges that you hear from, Ms. Pullman, from your small businesses?
It'll have to be a very quick answer. Very quick answer, please.
Yeah, it is. It's certainly an issue, and again, it goes back to clarity of what the rules are and what you need to do in order to either access labor or get labor across the border, and that's still not clear. Even among professionals, all the way down to the technicians, there's lots of different categories and lots of different ways you can define them, and right now it's so complicated that often when you think you've filled out the forms correctly, you still run into complications. So that would definitely be an area that we'd love to see streamlined in a much better way.
Okay, thank you. And I think we've got 1 minute left. Ms. Ramsey, you had a quick question?
I did. I just had a quick question. I'm not sure, Ms. Pullman, if it does affect small businesses, but in particular those that you represent, the de minimis. So there's been a lot of discussion about whether the de minimis should be raised. The U.S. is requesting $800. We do know that this happened in Australia, and there was a raise to $800, and they went right back to zero. So we're currently at 20. I'm just wondering if you can comment which direction your groups that you represent are advocating a move in with de minimis in NAFTA.
So we're on record as not increasing it, keeping it at $20. And part of the reason of that is that on the competition, it would be unfair to have your online competitors being able to bring in products and their customers not paying any GST or HST on it. So essentially, they're going to be 13 to 50% cheaper than if they're at brick and mortar stores in Canada. So we believe that it would create an unfair competitive level in Canada, and that we want to keep it at the $20 level and not have it raised.
Well, thank you very much. And that wraps up our first panel, and we're doing really well. Second panel. Second. We're really driving her. Thank you, panelists. Thank you for joining us. We're just going to suspend for a minute, and then we're going in camera because we have some very important future business, which puts us back on track for the next group of witnesses coming in around 5:30. So we'll just suspend a minute, and then we're going to go right into in camera future business. Okay, can MPs take their seats? We're good to go? Good. Okay, welcome back, everyone, and welcome to the table panelists. Sorry, we had some future business we had to discuss right away. It was dealing with, as you know, our studies on future trade with U.S. and Mexico, and we have a serious situation in Mexico, as many of you know. So we're planning on going there Saturday. So everything has changed. So we had to deal with that business. And so anyway, thanks for your patience. And as many of you are here before, we usually try to keep it under 5 minutes each presentation, and then we'll have good dialogue with the MPs. Now we have with us today is Fertilizer Canada. We have Smart Prosperity Institute, and we have the Chicken Farmers of Canada. So maybe we can start off with the Fertilizer of Canada, and we have Mr. Graham, the Senior Vice President. Go ahead, sir, you got the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Eiking and members of Parliament. Thank you for that introduction. Thank you also for inviting Fertilizer Canada to speak with you today in relation to the state of trade among Canada, the United States, and Mexico. We are pleased to appear before you and provide the committee with information about our mandate as an association, as well as to present our recommendations in the context of the North American Free Trade Agreements negotiation. I am Clyde Graham, Senior Vice President of Fertilizer Canada. Fertilizer Canada represents the manufacturers, wholesale, and retail distributors of potash, nitrogen, phosphate, and sulfur fertilizer and related products. Collectively, our members employ more than 12,000 Canadians and contribute over $12 billion annually to the Canadian economy through advanced manufacturing, mining, and distribution facilities nationwide. As the foundation of Canada's agri-food sector, Fertilizer Canada continues to make changes that positively impact the environment, the economy, and the social fabrics of Canadian life. NAFTA is of significant interest to our members and their farm customers. Farmers and agribusinesses on both sides of the 49th parallel depend on imports and exports of fertilizer in an integrated North American sector. Fertilizer Canada has consistently supported regional and bilateral free trade agreements, including the Canada-Europe Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement and the proposed Trans-Pacific Partnership. And we're also engaged in the exploration of China and other agreements that are potentially in the works. We certainly support an expanded and modernized North American Free Trade Agreement to protect and enhance free trade within North America. We would like to bring forward several key recommendations to support the Canadian government's goal to modernize and strengthen NAFTA. I'd like to say that in essence, I think our approach, while we support an enhanced NAFTA, we'd certainly like the Government of Canada to take a do-no-harm approach. What we have is pretty valuable, and we'd like to sustain it and make it better. Foremost, we need to protect the interests of our farmer customers in Canada, the United States, and Mexico, who depend on access to cost-effective fertilizer products and services. Canada is the world leader in potash fertilizer production and export, accounting for 52% of global potash reserves. Canada is also the 9th largest producer of nitrogen fertilizer in the world, and almost half of the nitrogen fertilizer produced in Canada is exported to the United States and its farmers. Additionally, the United States exports between 800 to 900 million in fertilizer products to Canada each year, mainly phosphate and nitrogen fertilizers, including monoammonium phosphate and urea. Canada maintains a significant trade surplus in fertilizer with the United States, about 4-to-1. Maintaining or improving integrated supply chains within the United States and Mexican markets is imperative to Canadian manufacturers during the NAFTA renegotiations. Fertilizer Canada also recommends that we support regulatory harmonization and cooperation. A consistent science-based approach will prevent the creation of protectionist trade barriers under the guise of environmental, health, and sanitary or phytosanitary rules. Strengthening regulatory cooperation will reduce regulatory approvals required for products produced and sold across the region. To achieve this, we recognize modernizing customs procedures and expanding the range of skilled workers and professionals for free movement within NAFTA. And that is certainly an area we'd like to recommend strongly as executives and other professionals and skilled workers move within companies that are integrated in North America in the fertilizer industry, and that's an important value for the entire North American economy. Lastly, we recommend the following provisions should be maintained or adopted during the NAFTA renegotiations. Maintain the current zero duty rate on fertilizers and chemical commodities listed in the harmonized tariff schedules for chapters 28 and 31. maintain the exemption of merchandising processing fee on imports of NAFTA-declared goods, maintain current tariff shift rules of origin for fertilizers and chemicals listed in the harmonized tariff schedules 28 and 31 to avoid unnecessary administrative burden, and adopt the chemical reaction rule for the quantification of chemicals to align NAFTA with other modern free trade agreements and provide administrative efficiencies.
Are you almost wrapping up?
Yep.
Okay.
To conclude, appropriately enough, I want to thank the members of the committee for this opportunity to present our views. In summary, our recommendations are: protect the interests of our farmer customers across North America who depend on cost-effective fertilizer products and services, support science-based regulatory harmonization and cooperation, and maintain and adopt provisions to protect fertilizers and chemical commodities in NAFTA. We welcome the opportunity to continue this dialogue, which I think is going to go on for some considerable period of time, and we're pleased to answer any of your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. And we're going to move over to Smart Prosperity Institute, Senior Fellow, Mr. Ronalds.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Do I need to? No. Okay. It's red. It's good. I should tell you a little bit. I'm with the Smart Prosperity Institute at the University of Ottawa. We're a clean economy think tank with a research network across the country of academic researchers in this area. And you may be asking yourself what a trade agreement should concern itself with environmental issues. You've had 3 environmentalists today, or more or less. And isn't life complicated enough without making the poor trade negotiator's life even more difficult to add in something else? I was involved with the original NAFTA. I'm old enough to do that. Clyde was actually involved with the creation of the GATT, so we're both ancient in all of this. and we asked ourselves, I was there at the WTO. We asked ourselves the same question. The answer's still the same. Under sustainable development, the environment and the economy are joined at the hip. Policies in one sphere which ignore the other are bound to fail. And we've got all sorts of examples at hand to illustrate this mutual interdependence. Think pipelines, think the management of natural resources. Canadian industries learned a great deal about environmental performance since the beginnings of NAFTA. We're now among the world's leaders in forest management. Our mining industries continue to improve their performance. Our fisheries management practices are vastly improved. Canadian brand is now a trade advantage in all sorts of commodities markets, potentially. NAFTA was a pioneering agreement with its environmental side agreement. The environment's now a staple of every major trade agreement and now a common topic at the WTO. So we welcome the stated desire of all parties to bring the environment into the main text of the agreement and to strengthen it. It's a side agreement now. It's much more modern to put the environment into the main text of the agreement. I want to talk about 2 things. One, which you've heard already about, which is Chapter 11, the Investor-State Dispute Resolution Mechanism, and the second is Canada's obligations under the Paris Agreement and the road to a clean economy. Chapter 11, you probably all know about it, but in brief, it gives investors the right to take governments to an arbitration tribunal should they feel they've been mistreated by any level of government in the 3 countries. It was included in the original agreement to reassure investors in Mexico that they would be compensated in the event of expropriation. Canada was indifferent, but the U.S. and Mexico were strongly in favor. But it's since become a very blunt instrument. It has in it phrases like fair and equitable treatment and expropriation, which have been very, very broadly construed by the panels. And we're the victims of this. There have been 39 claims against Canada. We've lost almost all of them. It's cost $215 million. It's cost the federal government $215 million. And the majority of the claims have been based on environmental issues, in many cases effectively challenging the rights of government to regulate. These are international arbitrators in a system that's used for commercial arbitration, contract disputes. And they are now deciding whether or not the government of Saskatchewan or Alberta or Ontario has the right to regulate on a particular issue. Gordon Ritchie, who's no softy, who was one of Canada's top negotiators on the original Canada-U.S. deal, described it as an unbelievable intrusion into sovereignty the other day. So what to do about Chapter 11? Seems as if the government's preferred position is a regime similar to that constructed under CETA. It is more structured. It has appointed members who serve without the conflict of interest common under the present system. It has an appeals body, and perhaps most importantly, it contains a clear statement on the ability of governments to regulate as they see fit. If this doesn't work with the other two countries, Canada should at least insist on a clarification of the terms expropriation and fair and equitable treatment, or we'll be beaten over the head with this thing forever. Now, to Canada's climate strategy. Canada's greatest challenge over the next 30 years or so will be twofold: to move toward an economy which is far less carbon dependent than it is now, while continuing to support a robust energy sector. Not an easy task. This transition to a lower carbon economy will present unprecedented opportunities for the clean tech sector in particular, and will require a complex set of government actions to bring it about. President Trump's decision to withdraw from Paris and the actions of his EPA director in denying the basic science of climate change and relaxing many of the main environmental laws and regulations present Canada with a set of difficult choices. Here again, I think there are two potential NAFTA strategies.
Sir, you might have to wrap her up there.
Okay, well, one of them would be to basically begin to move toward a North American clean economy strategy, which in fact NAFTA could be used to do that, which would in fact include a discipline on fossil fuel subsidies, harmonizing product energy efficiency, and the constitution of a North American Clean Economy Commission. There's already a NAFTA Commission on Environmental Cooperation in Montreal. It works. It functions. This would be a good job for it to do. If that doesn't work, then Canada is de minimis, I think, to use that phrase again. We'll have to insist that the new NAFTA includes language that ensures that no provision restricts Canada's WTO rights under Article 20 to take environmental measures, and we should seek to have the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change included in the list of multilateral agreements that are under NAFTA. That's fairly common practice, but it's not there. Otherwise, our industry could find themselves in considerable difficulty when it comes to pursuing the pan-Canadian climate change framework. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry to go on a bit.
Thank you, sir. And we're going to go to one of our favorites, the Chicken Farmers of Canada. And I see you have, Mike, you have your winger with you?
I've got my
Rule?
I've got my left winger.
Left winger. Well, it's good to see you both, and as long as you know, you have two wings going.
After a red
Good to
light.
see you. Thank you for coming, and go ahead. You have the floor, sir.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Members, thank you for inviting us today to speak on NAFTA. At the outset, let me say that NAFTA, as currently structured, has been positive for both the Canadian chicken industry and the U.S. chicken industry as well. With the stability provided by supply management, the Canadian chicken industry has been able to focus on growing demand for Canadian-grown chicken. And since implementation of NAFTA, we've grown our industry from 600 million kilograms a year to almost 1.2 billion kilograms a year. As a result, today, our 240 hatching egg producers, 40 hatcheries, 125 feed mills, 2,800 chicken farmers, and 191 processors sustain more than 88,000 jobs, contribute more than $7 billion to our economy, and pay more than $2.2 billion in taxes. It isn't just a couple of 2,800 chicken farmers that are engaged in this industry. But our supply management system is much more than just stability. We've levered our regulations to implement mandatory third-party audited on-farm food safety and animal care programs. We've reduced the use of the most important antibiotics to human medicine, and we aren't stopping there. We're investing and innovating for the future of our strong growth continues. To expand our capacity, all members have made significant capital investments in the last few years and are continuing with planned investments in new barns, new hatcheries, new processing plants right across the whole country. And the U.S. chicken industry? In its submission to USTR, the U.S. chicken industry stated, "The benefits of NAFTA to the U.S. poultry industry stand in stark contrast to our experiences in other countries where comparable agreements were never achieved." Canada is the second largest market for U.S. chicken exports after Mexico, in both volume and value. When considered on a per capita basis, we import 3 times as much as Mexico does. We imported 142 million kilograms of chicken from the U.S. in 2016, all of it duty-free. The United States also enjoyed a consistent positive balance of trade, $300 million a year. And because NAFTA access is tied to our Canadian production, it's increased every year. In fact, since they implemented NAFTA, U.S. access to our market has gone up 406%, while total U.S. exports to Canada are up 166%. There's no issue here from the U.S. Thus, NAFTA, as currently structured, is positive both for the Canadian industry and the U.S. industry. That doesn't mean some modernization and tweaking can't be done. So, a couple of regulatory misalignments that we would focus on: antibiotic classification. Particular importance to us is bacitracin, which is a key antibiotic that we use, is classified as not important to human medicine in the U.S., while Canada and the World Health Organization say that it is. Furthermore, the U.S. definition of raised without antibiotics allows them to use ionophores if approved by USDA and labeled. While we've done a good job in having the U.S. repeal country of origin labeling for pork and beef, it hasn't been done in chicken. It's still on the books. And we're not aware of any national on-farm food safety or animal welfare programs in the U.S. from a national perspective. Another concern that we've had, that we've raised with you in the past, is fraudulent spent fowl imports. These illegal imports represent the loss of about 2,700 jobs in Canada on an annual basis. It's also a food safety issue. Because this is fraudulent product, we've broken the chain of traceability. So if there's a food safety recall in the U.S., in Canada, because we've broken that traceability chain, we won't know where it is, and we put Canadian consumers at risk. The U.S. must commit to finding a means of ensuring that their exports of spent fowl, we're not trying to stop them, are indeed spent fowl and not fraudulently labeled broiler chicken meat. We believe NAFTA modernization should create regulatory alignment on the issues. Chicken farmers are proud of the role that we play, but we don't think that we should be put at a competitive disadvantage because we've been willing to shoulder these additional burdens. So, what would we recommend? Going in terms of context, you've got to put it in context. The U.S. is 17 times the size of our industry, 18 billion kilograms to just 1.2 billion kilograms. In fact, their exports are 3 times the size of our total production. We sit beside an elephant in terms of our industry. That magnitude makes it important to keep the system that we have. We need the over-quota tariffs that maintain the level of access to what we've negotiated. Any reduction in the over-quota tariff would jeopardize the stability of our industry and put it at risk. Second, in terms of the access, we've negotiated 7.5%. Second, that makes us the second largest importer from the U.S., 14th largest importer of chicken globally, and it will go up every year. So there's already a built-in escalator clause in terms of our access. So we don't believe there should be any additional access given from a percent of our market. Third, we have to preserve our rights on animal agriculture special safeguards. And lastly, the regulatory misalignments around cool, fraudulently labeled spent fowl antibiotics. We appreciate the support that you have provided to us over the years. We think we can come out on a positive basis on these negotiations if we stand firm across Canada of what's important. Look forward to your questions. Thanks.
Well, thank you. And I just got one quick question for you. Is you said we're the second biggest, well, we would be the second biggest exporter from the United States. Who's their biggest export market?
Mexico is their largest in both volume and value, and we're the and we're the second largest in both volume and value. The U.S. chicken industry understands that NAFTA is a benefit to them. They're not looking. Would they say if they got a bit more access, they'd like it? Yes. But what's important to them, same as Clyde has said, do no harm.
Okay, thank you. And we're going to go right to dialogue with the MPs. And we got the Conservatives up for 5 minutes first. And Mr. Dreeshen, you got the floor.
Thank you very much, and there's just so many different things to go and talk about right here with the three excellent presentations. I'll start with, raised without antibiotics, and you can throw into that added hormones, and we understand exactly what is taking place there. It is a marketing ploy. It has nothing to do with safety. And, so I mean, all of those kinds of things are significant. Spent fowl. I know it's an issue. People say, well, we're giving 110%. Well, that's about what we're getting out of the spent fowl that's coming out of the U.S. It doesn't work. So obviously, we know that there's some concerns there. Do you have any ideas just how we can deal with that one particular issue on the spent fowl?
The key piece on that one is, and we've been pushing for, is DNA testing. We have gone through, we've worked with Trent University to have DNA testing. We really we're at the point where the government needs to get its own validation of our test. We think it's good. We didn't do it. The people at Trent University did. And so we think that's the key step. Because you don't have to use it all the time, but that you've got it in hand, I think will stop the fraudulent part.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Graham, on the Fertilizer Canada side of things, I am a farmer, and I understand the sorts of things that you require as far as fertilizers are concerned. I know the different types of feedstocks that you require, especially when you're looking at nitrogen fertilizer. We've been told that with the added costs that are coming from carbon tax, that the margins as far as being able to take our Canadian product into the States are going to be so small that we may well lose that market. Also been told that who will take up that market will be China, and they base it on coal. So, we are not looking at the unintended consequences, perhaps, of some of these. There's issues that exist there. And I guess when you look at the kinds of things that we should be keeping in mind as we look at the fertilizer industry, that should be one of them as well. And I don't know how you tie that into NAFTA, but these are issues that the fertilizer industry is going to be there. And what your main point was is that how are you going to maintain security for farmers? And if we're caring about Canadian farmers, this is one of the issues that we should be looking at. One of the things that I did want to ask about, you talked about the chemical reactions rule and to have that align with other agreements. Could you just perhaps give a quick update as to what you look for there?
Well, it is interesting that I was preparing for this brief. I looked at that recommendation, and it's the one that I probably know the least about. So, I mean, I think it's essentially that there is a system for determining the kinds of chemicals, and that we need a harmonization on that. We could send the committee more detailed. But I think it's an example of where Canada and the United States have slightly different systems for analysis. One is not necessarily better than the other, and finding a way to either Canada adopt the U.S. or vice versa. I think in this case we're asking Canada to adopt the U.S. system. I don't think it has any I don't think there's significant differences. It's simply we'd have one system for the whole industry. So I think that's what we're doing, and I think it's an example of the kinds of areas where regulatory harmonization could be important. But I can send you details on that.
Certainly, thank you very much. And Mr.
If you wanted just me to respond on climate change, just very briefly, we are working with the federal government and the provinces to get achievable targets for our reduction for our industry. We have limits on that because of the engineering and the science of ammonia production and potash production as well. Our industry supports the aims of climate change, so we are hopeful that we're going to get outcomes from the federal government and from the provincial governments that will recognize the limitations of our industry and secure the North American competitiveness of our industry.
And of course, with issues there, I mean, if you don't, you're going to be bringing in fertilizers from Egypt and so on, which are going to be, again, being able to undercut because they have different sets of rules that they're working on.
Well, you know, the market will adjust as it adjusts.
Do I have my time?
Not really, no.
Okay. Thank you.
She's right on the wire there, but good questions. But we're going to have to move over to Liberals, and we have Madame Lapointe. You got the floor for 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup d'avoir respecté votre temps. Thank you so much for having stayed within your time. Much appreciated. I have some questions for you, Mr. Graham. You have mentioned skilled workers as well as professionals, saying that it might be necessary for your business to ensure that these people be able to cross the borders more freely. Tell us more about that.
Oh, thank you.
That's fine, we'll wait. So what type of skilled workers, when you were mentioning skilled workers, who were you thinking of? What type of skilled workers? Because you were saying it would be easier if it were simpler for the 3 countries to allow these people to move more freely across borders. So who is that about?
Our companies, our largest companies, tend to be integrated in North America. Some are based in Canada, like Agrium and Potash Corporation. Some are based in the United States, but have very significant assets in Canada. I think one of the interesting things of our industry is senior executives from those companies tend to move back and forth across the border, which is a good thing for Canada because we are having very significant executives, positions of influence in the United States, in their industry, and vice versa. But there's a wide range of people that move. For example, there are kinds of welding trades that we need on an occasional basis to do renovations of our facilities. Canada is not a big enough country to have large numbers of those skilled trades, and from time to time it's important for us to bring them in on an occasional basis. Scientists, engineers, other people like that.
So what effect would that have on your sector if that were in the new agreement?
This is an area that I think we would like to protect and possibly enhance. So it does exist. There is a degree of labor mobility within the NAFTA. We think that's a good thing for both Canadians and Americans, and in certain industries for Mexican employees. We'd like that to continue and expand.
OK, merci. J'aurais une question pour vous, Monsieur Ronald.
I have a question for you now, Mr. Reynolds. Earlier, you mentioned a clean economy strategy, keeping in mind that some people have turned down the Paris Agreement. What's your view of how we could include that within the newly negotiated NAFTA?
Well, I think there's an optimistic strategy and a pessimistic strategy. I mentioned them quickly at the end. I think the pessimistic strategy is that we have to make sure that we protect our right to honor and Mexico's rights to honor our obligations under the Paris Agreement from actions that penalize Canadian producers and Canadian companies that have actually obeyed Canadian law. So it's quite, and normally in trade agreements there is a list of international environmental agreements that are actually listed by name. And in NAFTA, the Framework Convention on Climate Change is not listed. I think Canada should at the very least make sure that it is listed, because if it's there, then basically Canada pursuing its obligations under that convention is non-actionable in trade terms. The more optimistic one that I explored very briefly is that the sort of future of a clean economy in North America is an enormously optimistic one, which could provide jobs, it could provide all kinds of employment opportunities and all kinds of technological opportunities. We're really at the stage now where Bloomberg New Energy reckons that by 2022, it will be cheaper to build from scratch a solar power plant in the United States and operate it than it will be to operate an existing gas-powered plant. So the economics are changing very rapidly. If the Trump administration is looking for some sort of an out on climate change, they're not going to sign up to Paris again. But if they're looking to begin to try and improve their reputation a bit, the administration is under enormous pressure now from governors. There's a list of 30 governors, mainly Republicans, who wrote to the president saying, you know, please don't mess around with renewable energy. Our states are very dependent on it. Large companies like Walmart are investing tons of money now in renewable energy. So it's an idea that's coming, and it's going to come no matter what the president does. If they're looking for a way to begin to leaven the effects of what they've said about climate change, being in favor of a growth of the clean tech sector, of a cleaner economy, is a very good way to do it. And there are ways in which we could modify NAFTA to permit tariff-free and barrier-free entry to environmental goods and services. We could do something about fossil fuel subsidies, which all the parties in this House have committed themselves to eliminate, and which all the G20 members have committed themselves to eliminate, including the United States and Mexico. And we could do something about this funny little commission in Montreal, this Commission on Environmental Cooperation, and instead of seeing it swept out the door, which it will be if you bring the environmental provisions into the treaty, it could in fact be a clean economy commission, which would give advice, which could begin to create discussions, which could help to harmonize regulations on energy efficiency, for example, so that you got the three countries talking about something that wasn't climate change. They're actually talking about clean energy, which is a big employer and a very profitable enterprise.
Sir, we have to, sorry, I know you're on a roll, but we...
No, I'm finished.
We have to cut. Okay, thank you. We're going to have to move over. We have to move over to the NDP, and go ahead, Ms. Ramsey, you got the floor.
I don't know where to start. I have so many questions. Like my colleague, I wonder if you could send us some information about the chemical reaction rule. That's something new to us here. And for all of you, if you do have a brief that you can submit to the committee following, that would be greatly appreciated to follow up with some of the finer details. My question, I'll go to the chicken folks first. And the first one is, you know, do you have any indication of a discussion of opening access further in NAFTA? Have you been given any indication by the government that this is something that could potentially be on the table? We certainly heard Donald Trump and the administration in the 19 pages referencing supply management more broadly. But do you have any indication that you will be included in those conversations?
We have no indication.
Okay.
In terms of that. So, okay. You know what? Our message to Mr. Trump, if he wants more access, sign TPP.
Okay.
It's there.
Okay, so there was an opening of you were opening TPP, like it was opening further in TPP.
Yeah.
So that's something then that you would consider?
Look, there was a deal done in TPP. Would I say if I was negotiating only for the chicken farmers of Canada that I liked that deal? Yeah. No.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, so my next question is about the coal, because do you think that there's an opportunity to address the coal issue in NAFTA then?
I'm not sure that there is, but I think there's enough demands from the U.S. side that we need to put back the same demands. I think there is a risk that some of our colleagues in agriculture fear of the U.S. coming back on coal. And all I want to signal is if they're coming back, our pushback has got to be strong, and it's got to include chicken as well.
Okay. Mr. Graham, my colleague had a conversation with you, which is very important, and it's about expanding the professional visas, the business visas that exist, and certainly my riding is on the border, and it's something that I hear quite often from folks that they want to expand that. So I wonder if you have submitted the list that you would like to see included to Global Affairs, or if you have participated in the government consultations in a way to be able to add to that list.
Yeah, we have not submitted a list yet. What the briefings we've received is that we're at a very preliminary stage because the U.S. have not put substantive proposals forward yet in many areas. I think we'd like to, we'll probably have to study that and see what particular areas we'd like to expand that in. But I think our biggest priority is protecting what we have now. That works quite well.
So I would encourage you, because I think this voice comes from a lot of different folks to talk about expanding that list. I would encourage you to submit specifically to Global Affairs where you see that expansion going forward.
Okay, we'll do that.
Thank you.
Thank
My
you.
last
and
question.
We'll send it to the committee as well.
I appreciate that. Mr. Runnels, my last question to you. I appreciate everything that you've discussed, and I think you heard our conversation earlier with Ms. Day. I want to ask you about the value of a continent-wide carbon pricing system to ensure that there's fairness amongst our jurisdictions.
Well, that's sort of nirvana, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not going to happen. It's certainly not going to happen in the near future. What is going to happen, however, is that the U.S. states are going to be more and more fractious on this issue. I mean, California is not going to back down from the Western Climate Initiative. There are others going to join. Neither is New York. So there's going to be a battle royal in the United States about carbon pricing. The interesting thing to watch, and it doesn't seem to be going anywhere, is that the Republican establishment, Jim Baker and George Shultz, the former Secretary of State, and a whole bunch of them, actually produced this proposal for a carbon tax of $40 a ton. And the deal is we'll loosen up regulation on the energy industry and we'll give all the money back to the citizens of the United States. So it's completely carbon neutral, or completely revenue neutral. I thought that would get a lot more hearing than it has. I don't know whether it's just that Washington is such a mess at the moment that they can't concentrate.
Well, we were really privileged when we were in California to hear Mr. Schultz in a speech, actually, that he gave to energy suppliers in the room, and it was quite fantastic. Our chair was able to participate in a panel with him. We were quite fascinated by that conversation as well, so I thought I would introduce that.
It'd be interesting if anything happens. That'd be a very good thing, but it's going to be a long time coming, I think.
My last question, I think you heard Ms. Day talking about the fact that what we currently have in NAFTA in terms of the environmental chapter, or not chapter, a side agreement, is not binding and enforceable. And you've given us some examples of how you feel that we could improve that. Is there anything else that you would add to that in terms of improving it, or putting some governance around what exists there to make sure going forward?
It has to be a short answer.
Watch out for the race to the bottom, particularly in the case of the United States, loosening and not enforcing environmental regulations as a deliberate way of stimulating investment. That's illegal under NAFTA, but it's very, very effusive, very elusive.
Thank you, sir. And we're going to move back over to the Liberals. And Madam Ludwig, you got the floor.
Thank you. My first question is actually to Mr. Dungate regarding the antibiotic use. So looking at the use of antibiotics, antibiotic resistance, and antibiotic residue, what is your reporting mechanism within your sector?
So a couple of steps. 2014, we eliminated any preventative use of Class 1 antibiotics.
Okay.
Most important to that. We made a decision in May of this year that by the end of 2018 we will eliminate Class 2, and our goal is to eliminate Class 3 by the end of 2020. So that's the process that we're on. We do antibiotic, we participate with CPARS, Public Health Agency of Canada, and we do surveillance there on antimicrobial resistance. We also do it through our on-farm food safety auditing, and so we check usage and we check resistance in terms of they do tests at a randomized basis, and we compare the results of that with CPARS.
Okay, so just on that, I'm actually quite curious about this. So when we look at antimicrobial resistance and the regulatory regime around that, how does that compare with the United States and Mexico?
So
is there harmonized? How far are we from harmonizing
There isn't anything harmonized.
standards?
We're moving ahead as an industry. There isn't a government regulation in place in that sense as well. I think what we're trying to do is we're moving a whole industry. So when we say there's no Class 1 antibiotics used, it's across all production in Canada. In the United States, it will be done by a company-by-company basis. So they'll only affect in their own company what they do. In neither country is there a government regulation in place at this point. There's talk about stewardship, and we're in line and participating in the government's antimicrobial resistance strategy. We've been in key committees in terms of that, and we support the direction it's going. Our point here overall is not raised without antibiotics. We want to make sure we have efficacy of antibiotics, both for humans and for animals, and that we can treat when necessary, but we're not going to use, as I call it, a low dose to kind of from a preventative basis. We're only going to treat.
I think it was not that long ago that it could have been in May that the United Nations looked at antimicrobial resistance as one of the key areas to be focusing on. And if we're looking at you, listening to you, Mr. Tungate, when you talked about the volume of imports of chicken from the United States, and I mean, to me as a consumer, I think that's a concern if we're looking at, when we all should be concerned in this room about antimicrobial resistance across the board, whether it's in livestock, whether it's in fish, whether it's in humans. And I would hope that part of the negotiations really would be looking at the harmonization and raising that standard across the board, because it's not only our domestic production, but also in our exports, and also the expectation of Canadians on the import side.
Right. We've appreciated, there have been some companies, we talked about the marketing advantage over here. Some are taking a marketing advantage. You can't do 100% raised without antibiotics. Birds will get sick, humans will get sick. That's an impossibility. So our point is to not use the ones of importance to human medicine and keep the efficacy for both humans and animals.
Okay.
That's our objective.
Thank you. Do I have more time, Mark?
Well, yeah, you were talking about splitting it, but you had about a minute.
Oh, no. Do you have a question, then, Sue? Okay, you go ahead. Thank you.
Mr. Graham. Mr. Graham, you mentioned about professionals moving across both nations. I'm a professional engineer as well as land surveyor, and I can do that. But if you are telling us that there should be the professionals under your jurisdiction or your work should be able to move freely, wouldn't be opening up a Pandora box? Then every other field will be coming in, and they will say, well, our workers should be allowed. How would it negatively impact?
Well, I think Canada has been living and the United States and Mexico have been living in an era where there is a degree of labor mobility, at sort of the more executive, professional, skilled trades levels, which I think has been good. And I think we'd like to protect that. So what we have now has not been negative in any way that I know. I think it allows Canadians to have the opportunity to have influence in the United States and potentially in Mexico as well. And I think it allows for Americans to come here and have a better understanding of Canada, which is beneficial. I think it's Canada, I think, does extremely well. I know in our industry there are many Canadians in CEO positions in the United States, and they may have gone from visa to citizenship, but Canada has a tremendous influence in the U.S. and hence the global fertilizer industry, because our executives and other professionals are very good and in demand.
Okay, that wraps it up, and that wraps up our panel today. And thank you for the witnesses coming here. Very good dialogue, and I also thank MPs. This has been a very hard-working week. We got a lot done, and we almost went through 20 witnesses, and with all the situation in Mexico. Job well done. Remember, next week we're off to the States. Bring your passports, and have a good weekend.